Haki hiwisila samamo. Shoni, Atawakila, Kespoko, Pilawi, Blanchard, Hotawi Piwesi. My name is Paulette Blanchard. I'm absentee Shawnee in Kickapoo from Oklahoma. I graduated from Haskell. I got a master's at the University of Oklahoma. I'm doing a PhD at the University of Kansas. I greeted you and I asked how you were feeling. One of the ways that we have is that when we greet each other, we don't say, hey, hi. You know, when we say, how are you doing? We ask, how do you feel? Because when we ask, how do you feel? We're genuinely asking you, are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Can I get you something? Are you tired? I will help, provide for you what you need. And I also mentioned that I am Shawnee. I'm of the divisions, the medicine people, the warrior people, and the leader people. On my great-grandmother's side, I'm from the leader people and the warrior people, and on my grandfather's side, I'm from the warrior people and the medicine people. I'm Bird Clan, and my Shawnee name loosely translates to gold feather of an eagle. I'm going to talk about some things that I've been growing into over the years. I am a second-generation Vine student. Like Michelle mentioned, I received my influence of Vine Deloria from Daniel Wildcat. And it's the mentorship that I've been honored with over the years, and partnerships and friendships that have helped me through one of the most violent spaces I've ever experienced, which is Western academia. So to go into my talk, I'm gonna read, because I apologize if it seems kind of choppy, but I write better than I speak sometimes, and I get mad at myself if I forget things, so please bear with me. Indigenous feminism is not a new concept, as prior to colonization, many indigenous people maintained equity and fluidity of gender roles. It's been since colonization that the term feminism has even been coined to argue for equality and justice. It is through reclaiming indigeneity and attempts to decolonize that we have seen a rise in acts of resistance, especially around protecting place. Indigenous women and Two-Spirits have become more visible on the front lines of environmental movements. These movements are not new, but the visibility of women in leadership roles is noticeable. Indigenous women around the world are stepping forward, leading acts of resistance against the environmental degradation of traditional homelands, sacred places, and water. It is this resistance to colonial settler patriarchy, imperialism, and capitalism that I like to explore for insight to the rationale of Indigenous women and femmes for why they why they are leading the fight against the government, corporations, the gas and oil industry in their struggle to protect our Mother Earth. Over the past 500+ years, Indigenous people have been suffering continued violence and genocide at the hands of the settler society. Where there have been waves of civil rights movements, feminism, and social justice, we Native peoples are still suffering casualties of the systemic institution and environmental racisms that exist. The violence imposed on Native peoples and apathy of the larger population is indicative of a lack of accountability and recognition of the largest crime against humanity, continual genocide of Indigenous peoples of the Americas. Joanne Barker in 2016 pointed out that multiple times Native peoples, especially women and Two-Spirited peoples, have been excluded from justice in history, while their uncivil civilization stand on our throats and bones for their own legitimization and justice at the expense of ours. This has led to thousands of laws and policies that are meant to oppress and violate us, using their science to validate their fuzzy logic. When taking of our lands, they also entitled themselves to our women, our children, and today we see these remnants with cultural appropriations of our cultures, stereotyping of our images, and continued policies that continue to make Native women vulnerable to rape, abuse, and death at rates no other population can claim or wants to. Everybody wants to be an Indian until you actually have to be one. The connection between settler colonial violence includes the idea that utopia is somewhere else. So degrading the places that we are now will not matter because heaven is elsewhere, and has been supported by the system of white male superiority and the science that supports it. It is the constructed fear of losing power, control, and most importantly, money, that feeds chaos of current binaries of us and them, while really not acknowledging the subtle class war and corporatocracy that exists. In April of 2016, Lakota youth and women set up a camp outside the Standing Rock Lakota Reservation north of Cannonball, North Dakota, against the Goliath oil and gas industries, and no one noticed. Well, Indigenous people noticed. They were not alone in their stance. As the Rice Lakes in Minnesota, more women were making stands against the rape of their land and waters by energy companies as well. In Oklahoma, women started their fight against the hundreds of oil and gas corporations in the places they live, work, and have ceremonies. Interestingly, earlier in 2012, it was women and two-spirited peoples that took on the extractive industry in Canada and started a worldwide movement called Idle No More. Indigenous women are taking the lead against the violence of our land, air, water, as well as our body. And the two spirits are included in this idea of femininity. Standing Rock and all it stood for threatened more than the gas and oil industries. It forced the imperial settler colonial society to look at itself and its role in the atrocities against Indigenous peoples, our two-spirited peoples, women, and our Mother Earth. The United States is an illegal government based on imperialism, white supremacy, colonization, capitalism, theft, lies, greed, and genocide. Standing Rock has much symbolism beyond the protection of water, the leadership of Indigenous feminine, and the responsibility and the fight for justice. It's about reclaiming our power, our sovereignty, and our inherent responsibility and relationship to Mother Earth and all of our relations in all of the 7 directions. It's about honoring our ancestors and our descendants yet to be. It's all about the community we Indigenous people have and the lessons learned, or science, from hundreds of thousands of years of evolution and survival, and the lessons that come from these methods of knowledge and acts of wisdom. It is about climate. It's about social, reproductive, and environmental justice. It was about standing strong on the ancient grandmas and grandpas that are the original beings before humans, the rocks, the water, the stars, the blood of our peoples is in the soil that shelters and nourishes us. We are beyond that tipping point that they talk about as climate change. As an Alaskan elder told a group of us at a meeting up in Alaska that we're beyond adaptation. It's about surviving climate change. Climate changed was the theme of the 10th year anniversary of the Indigenous Peoples Climate Change Working Group, because we know the climate around the world, physically, culturally, and politically, has changed. It was through this meeting I realized how much it has changed, and yet how much still needs to change, as we will never survive or move beyond if we continue to depend on an outdated and infantile science. Science based on white, hetero, Christian, able-bodied, male supremacy, control, and of course money, thus power. I experienced an Indigenous woman attempt to educate a colonized man of color, not from Turtle Island, on needs and ways for men in science to communicate more effectively with human beings, more than human beings, women and other marginalized and oppressed beings. In his wounded brownness, he attacked her and offered no knowledge. He attacked her and her offer of knowledge. No one stood with her in that moment. Shamefully, this included myself. While she stood up to his patriarchy, colonization, and dismissive rebuttals to her, that strong, beautiful Indigenous woman walked out of that room with her moccasins still on and her integrity and identity intact. I followed after her, and once I wrapped my mind and heart around my own personal violence, I went back into that room and I confronted the room of people on our collaborative silence, which was her immediate violence and our collective historical and generational violence. Silence is violent, and I spoke out. We are Standing Rock. We are Idle No More. In that moment, the room full of mixed peoples from around the world and across Turtle Island ripped open the infected wound of our oppression, apathy, colonization, and violence. We were all very uncomfortable. It is in the moments of discomfort we find ourselves, and the ancient weakness and the ancient strengths embedded in our DNA passed down from our ancestors, and our backs straighten, our fears face down, and our weakness becomes strength. We owned our complacency and promised to change. We honor our two-spirit peoples, women and men equally. We are active agents of transition and all have a part. I realized my part in the moments that followed, as I owned my own silence and violated the institutional structures that must hold me down as to stand on me and over the bones of my ancestors. I refuse to be silent, and I will continue to stand with all of the Standing Rocks out there to fight to the death for the survival of all of my relations against the many-headed black snakes around the world, as I expose the hubris and fallacy of Western science and the illegitimate power of the imperial, capitalist, patriarchal, colonial settler society as it struggles to claim and what it fights. Settler society struggles to claim and fights to cling to. Stand strong for our ancestors. Stand strong, for our ancestors are our entourage. Our mother has been raped, her bones broken, her blood and tears poisoned and forcefully, violently penetrated, then injected with poisoned fluids of fracking, gas and oil extraction, and so forth. They are murdering our mother, and we have been silent too long. We are all Standing Rock, and if we are not, we best get idle no more, because your silence is our violence. I'm willing to die to protect my mother and all of my relatives, so what are you willing to die for? Because if you don't stand up against the rape and violation of our mothers, we are already dead. I do not know a lot, or speak for anyone but myself, but I do know that I am the descendant of an Indian they could not kill. Wait a minute, one more. And one last thing. This is a map. Some people see it as art. Some people see it as moving. But it is a map of the water cycle as we see it as women. The artist is Christy Bellacourt. I love her work. I think she's amazing. But I want to read one more thing. Water memory is the purported ability of water to retain a memory of substances previously dissolved in it, even after an arbitrary number of serial dilutions. As Indigenous people, we have always known and believed that the earth have life, consciousness, and memory. It makes me think that it's not a coincidence that our missing and murdered Indigenous women, when found, are found within rivers and lakes. In a way, I feel like our mother and all forces of this earth compel the monsters who take the lives of our women to return to a source of life, to take their memories and hold it for eternity in the water. Women, like water, are life givers. We are knowledge keepers, and our blood memories run deep. Our love runs deeply through generations, past, present, and future, and for the water to hold our stolen sisters, to hold their memories and powers in its memory, in its consciousness, and continues their stories, and it continues their powers. So water is life. We are water. Water is us. Penny, Niawe, thank you.